Good morning, folks. Welcome back to the farm. A little chilly outside. We're going to work on something in the shop today. My oldest daughter contacted me and asked me to make something for her, so we're going to do that today. Come on back and watch. So my daughter Becky contacted me, sent me a picture of a game board she would like me to make for her. I think the game is called Mancala. It's a flat board with some divots in it where you move like some little marbles or little game pieces around. I'm not sure exactly how it's played, but I'll show you a picture of the board. So we looked up the sizes online, and it says the board is 1 inch thick. So I searched around in the rafters up here, and I found an old nice 1 inch thick board that we're going to cut this out of. The board has a little cupping going on, but I think if I cut one side off of it, it's going to be sufficient to stay flat. So the game board is 4.5 inches wide, so I set my saw at 5 inches. We're going to carve this side off of it, and then we'll reset the saw to 4.5 inches, and we'll cut it down. That way we have two nice clean edges on the outside. So we got our board cut to 4.5 inches. We got a nice clean edge on both sides. So we're going to look up what the length is and figure out which portion of this board we want to use. That's how you start a fire. So the dimensions call for 17.3. So we're just going to call it 17.5. So let's get rid of our fence. Write it down. Go to our crosscut guide. So we obviously want to chop this angled end off, so we'll do that. That can go in the fire. It's nice having a wood stove in the shop, you can do that. So let's see, 17 and a half is going to put us about right there. So we'll line that up with the saw blade. Trim that off. So that worked out good because there was a crack in this end of the board, but it stops about right here, so that's perfect. Now you can see the board still wobbles a little bit, but if you turn it upside down, the cupping is down to where it doesn't wobble. But we'll try to take some of that out with the sander, because we're going to have to sand this down anyway. That's pretty rough. So more wood for the fire. Take the chill off. I think that'll work just fine. Okay, the per the instructions or the directions or the size that I found on the internet, the holes on the end are 2 inches wide. So I threw my 2-inch Forstner bit in the drill press, and I've centered my vise to where it's exactly center of the board, and I've clamped the board to where the it's a 1/2 inch off the edge. So I'm just using this to mark it. I'm not going to drill down per se, because we're going to do the bulk of this with the router, but this will serve as a really good marker, and then we'll do it on this end and also this end. All right, we got our 2 end holes marked, 2-inch holes. Now the rest of the field is 2 rows of holes. The holes are 1.5 inches wide, and there's 6 holes. So we're going to lay all that out. We're going to draw the center line for the holes, and then we'll do the same thing over on the drill press. We'll clamp it to where the drill bit lines up with our line, or where we want the holes to be, and then we'll just drill right on those center lines. We'll flip the board around, run it back in, and then that'll get the other side, and everything will be exactly even. So what we figured out, we've got a 1/2 inch here between this hole. So we figured on these holes we would continue with that theme and do a 1/2 inch from the edge. And then I would also do a 1/2 inch between these holes and this hole. So we measured a 1/2 inch in. And then we found something that was 1.5 inches in diameter and marked those holes. And then we marked the center line of those holes. And then we measured from this center line to this center line. So if we're needing 6 holes, that means there needs to be 4 more holes in the center. So we measure from this line to this line and divide by 5, because even though there's 4 holes, there's 5 spaces. So you want to divide by 5. So measuring this in inches, which is what we do here in the United States mostly, it's just under 10 inches. So, or just under 10 and a half, excuse me. So 10.5 divided by 5 is 1.1. Well, measuring 1.1 in inches is pretty difficult, because inches are not laid out in 10 part pieces. They're 1/16 of an inch on those little lines. Now they do make tape measures for like construction that each inch is split into 10 increments, but of course we don't have one of those. So what I do is kind of a hack, is we switch over to the millimeter side, because millimeters are all based on 10. The metric system's based on 10. And I think the metric system would be a lot easier for kids to learn, even though it seems kind of foreign to most people. Once you get into it, because everything's based on 10 in the metric system, everything makes so much more sense. So we had 26.5 millimeters. So that divided by 5 was 5.3 millimeters. So that's easy to measure. You go 5 and then you count 3 lines, you got 5.3. So we just did that all the way across. And we have even spacing. So all we have to do is, once we get our drill press set up, is just drill on these center lines, because the drill press will be set up to do the side-to-side measurement already. So as long as I drill on each one of these center lines, we'll be good to go. So we're going to go over the drill press and set that up with our 1.5" Forstner bit, and then we'll drill 12 holes in this, or mark 12 holes. All right, we've lined up the outside of this bit with our edge line here. So now all we got to do is move this. Let me tighten that up a little bit so it's a little tighter. We don't want it to play at all. All right, so all we got to do is move it back and forth, put it on these center lines, and mark our holes. All right, we got them all marked. So what I did is I ended up marking the outside of the holes instead of just the inside, because I found on the fly it was a lot easier to line up the outsides because you could see them. So that's what we did. We just transferred the lines out here. We measured 3/4 of an inch out from the center line, and then just use your tri-square, connect the dots. So my plan is, now that I've got all the holes marked, I didn't want to drill the holes with the Forstner bit because the whole bottom of the holes need to be rounded. So what I'm going to do, I believe I have a round bit for my router. I'm hoping I do. So what I'll do is I'll set my router at about 3/4 of an inch deep, and then I'll plunge the center of the hole, and then use these outside lines as a guide to follow my router bit around, and then clean that out with the router, each hole. So I'm going to go see what I got for router bits, and hopefully we can get her done that way. So checking my router bits, I do have a round bit. You can see what that looks like. So I think that's going to work. We'll get that chucked up into the router and we'll get her done. This bit must be in the router already. Okay, we've got our roundover bit chucked up into our router, and we have the base set at 3/4 of an inch depth, and that'll leave a 1/4 inch in the bottom of these holes. But before I start routing away on this, I want to make sure it plunges okay, because a bit that big may not plunge very well. So I'm going to try it on our scrap piece of wood first to see how controllable it is. And one of the hacks that I use, you can see this is that material like you put in the bottom of your cupboards, kind of a sound deadening stuff, and it keeps your stuff from moving around. Some people put it in their drawers of their toolboxes, but it's kind of rubbery and it keeps things from moving around. Whenever I'm sanding or routing, I lay this down on the table, and instead of clamping everything down, this kind of holds everything in place to where it's not going to move around. So let's do a test divot in that one and see how it's going to work. Okay, our first hole we realized very quickly that the cutter bit is only about 1/2 inch deep. So if you run it down to 3/4, it's not going to cut on the upper area and you can't move it around. So I had to back it off to where the cutter bit was even with the table or a little lower, and then we were able to cut a hole. And of course I didn't have the lines to follow, so it's not perfect, but you can see the rounded bottom of the hole. So I think that's going to work. And the specs that I have say the holes are 3/4 deep, so I'm wondering if this hole's deep enough, because that looks fairly deep if I remember the game or whatever. But we'll check it out and see how many pieces at a time would actually be in the hole to see if they will fit. But we can get started doing these holes on our actual piece. We got our holes mostly done, but we kind of had a little accident on this big hole here on the end, which was the first hole that I tried to do. I didn't have the router base sitting on the board as I tilted it to plunge it in, and the bit grabbed the wood and threw it and knocked a big chunk off over here. So it's no longer a circular hole. So I thought I would customize a little bit and kind of make this kind of a triangular hole on the end to compensate for that. So we'll come out to these lines and then do that. And I've already got it marked on that end as well. So let's give that a shot and see if it saves us. All right, we got it routed out. Doesn't look too bad. Looks pretty good. It's kind of the home area for the pieces I understand in the game. So, like Bob Ross used to say, happy little accidents. Came out fine. You can see that the bottoms of the holes, you can see the swirly pattern of the bottom of the hole in the bit, where the bit cut. I think I'm going to leave those. It kind of gives it like a hand-carved look. I think it'll kind of add to the look of it. So we need to get this thing sanded up. We've got to take all the rough off the back. We'll do that with our handheld belt sander. I was hoping that this crack here wasn't going to split out as I was routing, and we got lucky and it did not. So we'll take some wood filler when we're all done and fill those cracks in. You want to be able to see that. It doesn't go very far. But hopefully when I'm sanding this, it doesn't grab that and rip a piece off or something. We'll be real careful with it. Starting to come together. While I had the router out, I was going to put like a 1/4 round over bit and chamfer these edges here real quick. But I have figured out that I don't have a 1/4 round over. All I have is a 3/8, and I think 3/8 would be too much. But I will tell you what I do have. One of our subscribers, Rick Davis from Bonners Ferry, Idaho, sent me this 3/8 adapter for my 3/8 ratchet. They go to all the other sizes. If you remember when we were doing that Masterbuilt smoker, putting it together, I was going to try to speed things up and use my air ratchet. But I figured out I didn't have any adapters, and he was nice enough to send those to me, and I appreciate it. That's really, really cool. Thank you so much. That's awesome. It's like Christmas in March. Bonners Ferry, Idaho. Remember a movie back in the 80s? It was called Hot Dog. It was a skiing movie. And I think the star was named Harkin Banks, and he was from Bonners Ferry, Idaho. That brings back memories. That's back when in the video store, remember they had the racks on the walls and you could go through and you'd seen every movie in the store. And whenever a new movie showed up, you got on the list to rent it, the VHS tape or the Betamax. Remember that? And if you wanted to rent the VCR, it was this ginormous piece of equipment that weighed like 30 pounds and you had to carry it out of the store and take it home if you didn't already have a VCR. Wow, I'm dating myself. But let's get back on this. We've got all of our surfaces sanded with our belt sander, 120 grit paper. Did the edges, got all the rough off the back, all that. This crack here kind of concerns me. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to machine a notch or a slot in the end here. And I think we're going to cut a strip of wood to glue in that slot so it ties all of this together. And then we'll use wood filler on the crack, of course, before we put a finish on it. But that'll keep that crack from continuing if we stabilize the end of it here. So I'm going to try to do that real quick, and we'll show you what it looks like when we're done if we get it completed. All right, we got that done. We cut a slot in the end of the piece of wood on the table saw. Took me forever to get the right size spline. I cut like 5 of them. Finally got one that fit in there fairly snug. And we're using the Gorilla glue that expands in the joint. So it's going to be nice and tight when that cures. And then we'll come through and we'll trim all the excess off and sand it up real nice. And it'll look pretty cool. We're going to have to get some sandpaper and kind of go over the edges of these holes and kind of round those over a little bit. So I'll probably do that while that glue is curing. So we've gone around all the corners of the holes and all the edges of the wood and the corners down here with the exception of up here where it's drying. We'll get that later. But we've hit it with 80 grit. So we're going to go to probably some 120 and then maybe some 220. And that should probably be enough. And then we're going to do something special with the top. All right, we got her sanded up pretty good. So if you noticed on the original picture that I showed, there was some kind of little carvings on top up here. So we're going to do kind of something similar. I got a pencil and we're going to start doing some little doodling up here that we can carve out. So we've done some doodling on here. I'm going to use my little rotary tool with a small little burr on it to do my carving. Hopefully we won't screw anything up. So we did a little goofy carving on the top. It's no real professional job or anything. It just set it off a little bit so it's not so plain. So I want to darken all these lines up. So I'm going to get the torch with a real small tip in it. And I'm going to burn along those carving marks. It's going to do 2 things. All these little frayed edges in here, it's going to burn all those off. And I want to darken up the inside of those marks, and then we'll sand it off, make it look pretty again. So there it is after we burned it with the torch a little bit, and then we sanded it down again, get all the char off the top, and then that leaves the dark colors inside. We've sanded in here a little bit. We've kind of left that just a shade of dark in there with a little bit of light around the outside edges. That'll look cool once the finish is on here. So we need to let this glue dry down here, cure. Probably not going to mess with it till tomorrow. It'll be on this video though, so don't hang up. So I'm going to fill this right now so that can dry, and then tomorrow when we can sand all this, we'll sand this with it. And then we could give it a quick finish sanding and we'll put some finish on this thing. So we're going to make our own filler. We get a little bit of glue and get some of this sawdust that we've been creating from this same wood here. And then we're going to mix some of that up and make some filler. Got the crack filled up, and now we're going to put some more sawdust on there. Press it in there. That'll give it some little bit better color. And then we'll just leave it. And when we sand all this up, you'll may still see the crack, but once you finish it, it'll blend in really well. So that's it for now. Alright, it's the next day. All of this has dried very hard. I've already cut the excess off of the ends. So now we're going to sand this down flush. And then we'll give it the finish sanding, and then we'll get some sealer on this thing. All right, we got her all sanded up. I'm going to check the temperature, see if we're too cold to spray any lacquer. And if we are, we're going to have to wait a while. But let's go see. We got our first coat on. You'll see some whiteness in there inside those divots. All that will dry clear. Those little air bubbles will pop. More important thing is you get a nice smooth finish on top. Now, before we walk away and go clean our brush, you want to come underneath the edge and address any little drips that might have got underneath the edge, and then I just wipe it on here, and we'll do that all the way around to make sure we don't have sags or drips down on that bottom corner. But this is supposed to dry in a couple hours, and you're supposed to recoat within a couple hours. So we'll let this dry, and then we'll take a light sanding to it, and then we'll put another coat on it. So doing this indoors the way we are, because it's cold out in the shop, you want to make sure you're using a product that's low VOC, which VOC stands for volatile organic compounds. So this sealer that we're using doesn't put off a lot of fumes as it's curing. You'll notice some of the other, like oil-based stuff, you'll get a really strong chemical smell in whatever area, and you got to do it in a very well ventilated area. This, not so much. If you remember, we got chickens right here in this next room that Kelly's brooding, and I don't want to cause a big toxic environment down here for them. So we're using the water-based acrylic. Now, the other good thing is you can clean your brushes with water. You don't have to use the very harsh, like cleaners or thinners or what you would normally use for this stuff. So looking pretty good. Starting to cure real nice. Like I said, it'll lay down on its own. Even if you had brush marks in it, it'll lay down flat. And it dries clear. In the can, it's actually white. Kind of an opaque white color. But it dries clear. So we'll let this dry. We'll sand it and we'll put a final coat on it. And I'll show you what it looks with the final coat. Alright, it's all done. We sanded it down with 220 after it dried. And we put another coat on it. And it's been another 2 hours and it's all dry. Nice and smooth to the touch. Smooth as a baby's butt. So that wraps up that project. I hope Becky likes it. I'm sure she will. So we ordered some cool little colored stones for the game pieces on Amazon. And we'll get this to her. So till next time, stay safe, stay healthy. We hope you enjoyed this little project. Come on back and see us at Markelly Farm. We love you guys. Bye.